Donald Trump has announced on Truth Social that he is halting the U.S. military operation to escort ships through the Strait of Hormuz.
The U.S. will no longer escort ships through the Strait of Hormuz for, quote, a short time. So Trump posted on Truth Social saying the decision on military success and progress made toward a final agreement with Iran. He said, quote, while the blockade will remain in full force and effect, Project Freedom, the movement of ships through the Strait of Hormuz, will be paused for a short period of time to see whether or not the agreement can be finalized and signed.
When Donald Trump announced Project Freedom, the name alone signaled reassurance. It suggested order, protection, and a pathway out of chaos in Iran. Framed as a limited operation to escort commercial vessels through the increasingly dangerous Strait of Hormuz, the initiative was presented as a stabilizing force amid a fragile ceasefire between the United States and Iran. But beneath that hopeful branding lies a more complicated reality. Rather than calming tensions, Project Freedom may be accelerating the very escalation it claims to prevent. The context is critical. The ceasefire between Washington and Tehran, only weeks old, has never been particularly stable. The war itself, sparked by a dramatic Israeli strike that killed Ali Khamenei, has settled into a tense stalemate. Both sides are under pressure. Iran faces mounting economic strain as its oil exports stall, while the United States grapples with rising fuel prices and geopolitical uncertainty. Neither side appears ready to concede, and both believe that they retain the leverage. Into this volatile environment comes Project Freedom. Officially, the mission is narrow: ensure safe passage for commercial ships stranded in or avoiding the Strait of Hormuz, a choke point through which roughly a fifth of the world's oil supply typically flows. With hundreds of vessels backed up and global markets rattled, the economic rationale is obvious. U.S. officials have emphasized that the operation is temporary and defensive, not an attempt to reignite hostilities. Yet from Iran's perspective, the distinction is far less clear. Tehran has already signaled that it views U.S. naval movements as a violation of the ceasefire. Iranian officials argue that escorting tankers through contested waters, especially alongside the destruction of Iranian boats, drones and missiles, amounts to a form of military escalation. The fact that U.S. forces have engaged Iranian assets while carrying out the mission only reinforces that perception. What Washington frames as protection, Tehran interprets as provocation. This disconnect is at the heart of the problem. Project Freedom operates on an assumption that limited military action can coexist with diplomatic restraint. In theory, the U.S. can secure shipping lanes without broadening the conflict. In practice, each tactical move risks triggering a response. Iran's recent missile strikes on the United Arab Emirates underscore how quickly the situation can spiral. By targeting regional infrastructure and ports, Tehran is signaling that it has multiple ways to raise the stakes. The geography of the conflict makes escalation especially dangerous. The Strait of Hormuz is not just a shipping lane, it's a pressure point for the global economy. Iran has already threatened to deploy mines, drones, and fast attack craft to make passage unsafe. The U.S., in turn, has responded with a blockade of Iranian shipping. These overlapping strategies create a feedback loop. Each attempt to assert control invites retaliation, which then justifies further action. Project Freedom fits neatly into that cycle. There's also a symbolic dimension by naming the operation in aspirational terms. Trump's administration is attempting to frame it as morally and strategically necessary. But that framing may obscure the risks. Labeling a military effort as freedom does not change how it is perceived by adversaries or even by neutral observers. For Iran, the presence of U.S. warships guiding tankers through contested waters looks less like liberation and more like enforcement. Compounding the tension is the lack of clear communication between the two sides. While back-channel diplomacy, reportedly mediated by Pakistan, continues, public messaging remains contradictory. Pete Hegseth has insisted the ceasefire is intact, even as military engagements continue. Meanwhile, Iranian leaders warn that the U.S. has not seen the full extent of their capabilities. These competing narratives make it harder to establish mutual expectations or de-escalation mechanisms. The humanitarian and economic stakes are rising alongside the rhetoric. Thousands of sailors remain stranded on vessels unable to safely transit the strait. Reports of casualties, damaged ships, and disrupted ports highlight the human cost of what might otherwise seem like a strategic chess game. At the same time, energy markets are reacting to the uncertainty with price spikes affecting consumers far beyond the region. In this environment, even small miscalculations can have outsized consequences. A single misidentified vessel, a misinterpreted maneuver, or an overreaction to perceived threats could trigger a broader confrontation. Project Freedom, by increasing the density of military and commercial activity in a confined and contested space, raises the likelihood of such incidents. There's also a political dimension driving the operation. For Trump, the mission offers a way to project strength while maintaining the appearance of restraint. By emphasizing protection rather than aggression, the administration can argue it is safeguarding global commerce without pursuing outright war. But that balance is difficult to sustain. If the operation succeeds in reopening the strait, it may still provoke Iranian retaliation. If it fails, the pressure to escalate further will intensify. Iran, for its part, is unlikely to back down easily. The country's leadership has framed control over the Strait of Hormuz as a matter of sovereignty and survival. Allowing U.S.-escorted ships to pass unchallenged would undermine that position. As a result, Tehran has strong incentives to test the limits of Project Freedom, whether through direct attacks, asymmetric tactics, or expanded claims over regional waters. The broader strategic picture is one of convergence rather than resolution. Both sides are pursuing actions that make sense within their own frameworks but clash in practice. The US seeks to normalize shipping and stabilize markets. Iran seeks to maintain leverage and resist external pressure. Project Freedom does not reconcile these goals, it sharpens the contradiction between them. That leaves the ceasefire in a precarious state. Officially, it still exists. In reality, it's being eroded by incremental actions on both sides. Each missile strike, naval engagement, or blockade measure chips away at the fragile understanding that has kept the conflict from reigniting fully. The danger is not just that Project Freedom could fail, but it could succeed in the wrong way, restoring limited shipping access while entrenching a pattern of low-level conflict. Such an outcome would normalize instability, making future escalations more likely and more difficult to contain. Meanwhile, the cost of energy, oil, aviation fuel is rising. And in the end, the optimism embedded in the name Project Freedom may prove misleading. Rather than offering a clear path out of the crisis, the operation risks deepening the very dynamics that produced it. In a region where perception often matters as much as intent, even a mission designed to reassure can become a catalyst for confrontation. I'm Anthony Davis. You can find me on the 5 Minute News YouTube channel and podcast, on Wednesdays co-hosting Uncovered, on Global AF, on Legal AF, and on Sundays on The Weekend Show with Midas Touch.